Boston has long been home to a group of famous ducklings, but now a local family of swans is getting a whole lot of attention. After Matthew Raifman shared this photo of Papa Swan, as he's now affectionately known, carrying his baby's cygnets, they're called, on his back. Raifman joined me yesterday to discuss. Matthew, it's great to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
How'd you first become acquainted with the swans and their offspring?
Well, I've been following the story on social media like many of us have. And I followed the tragic story about the mother swan and just wanted to head on down there and see if I could get some luck in taking a photo of them.
Why'd you start following it to begin with? This is even before the birth. Why'd you start following it? What drew you to it?
Well, I think we all are kind of interested in swans and ducklings and other waterfowl in Boston. But I mean, there's a bigger story here, right? It's something to look forward to be kind of excited about as spring and summer come along. It's been a tough year for me and for, I think, many of us over the last couple of years, really, with COVID. And I was looking for something inspirational to enjoy.
And by the way, while you said the saddest part of the story, obviously, is the mother swan died, and there's no identification yet of the cause of death. So how did the photo come about?
Yeah, so I went down there, I biked, as I often do on the Esplanade, and I found the family a little ways up the river and started taking photos of them. But then I noticed, and they were fine, they were like good photos, but then I noticed that the swan was moving towards the lagoon, and I hopped on my bike and I booked it over to one of the bridges that cross over from the Esplanade and was able to get above the swans for this unique perspective. And it all kind of came together. But what was cool about it is when I was photographing them initially, all the swans were in the water. But when I went to look down the viewfinder and take the photo, these three swans, these three cygnets had hopped on Papa Swan. And I had this really extraordinary perspective on what was happening. I'd never seen anything like that before. But of course, it tends to happen, apparently, in the swan world. It just wasn't something I was familiar with.
You know, and after you said, I never saw anything like this before, you also called your wife, I read, immediately after. And what'd you say to her? And by the way, what you told her is correct, I bet. What'd you say to her?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah, I texted my wife and I said, this is probably the best photo I've ever taken. And I was elated.
Yeah.
It really clicked. Everything kind of pulled together in this one shot.
I don't know what you're going to do after this, but I guess you have that. You know, I'm no swan expert. I don't know if you've checked this out, but I looked at it after I saw your photo, and I had followed them a little bit, but not as much as you. There's much more equal parenting in the swan world generally than there is in the human world, I guess you probably know. You know, one of the things I loved about what you've said, and I know you've gotten colossal media attention as well, you well deserve, it's not just a beautiful story about a father, a grieving father probably, taking care of his kids, but you all, how we humanize these things. But you also talked about its extra significance considering the time in which we all witnessed this. Explain what you meant by that, Matthew.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, and I think it's natural for us to personify it because of this. We've been looking, I think, for something that was uplifting, I think, in society after the last couple of years, but not something that was a fairy tale. And I think that's what's kind of unique about this story is it's melancholy, right? There's this loss and tragedy in it, but then there's also this triumph and resilience that we see with the Papa Swan taking care of its kin. And I see a parallel with what we're all dealing with as a society right now in that story. We have dealt with tragedy. We are dealing with tragedy. Some of us have lost loved ones, but we're coming along in this resilient way to recover out of the COVID pandemic.
You know, since you had the courage to say that, I will have the courage to say what I would have been too embarrassed to say otherwise, is when we mentioned your photograph on the radio the other day, we got a ton of email and texts and tweets from people saying, I'm a father, and as a result of what I saw that father do, I'm going to be more intentional. I'm going to be a better father. And my initial reaction was, how ridiculous, until I thought about it a bit. I read you've got a kid who's a little under 2. How is this going to affect your fatherhood, do you think, going forward?
Yeah, I do have a kid. I have a toddler who's 20 months old. That's a great question. And I think we can all just, I agree, it's kind of ridiculous, but I'm inspired to be a better father and to be a more equal parent because we don't know what's going to happen, right? And it's really important to me to form that relationship with my son that I think we see the Papa Swan forming with his cygnets. And I'll also note, I've received some feedback from people who have lost their partners, and particularly husbands that have now lost their partners and are single parents. And I'm so touched by that, right? That this photo has particularly resonated with that community of people who've gone through this suffering in themselves as humans and have recovered and are dealing with that recovery and that resilience to be good parents to their children after their partners have gone on. So it's a real thing for some people who have seen this photo and are inspired by it.
That is unbelievable. Matthew, great photograph and great inspiration for a lot of great thinking. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.